I was standing in my kitchen making my morning coffee when I heard the car pull into our driveway. Vernon was back from his business trip to Paris. And Lord help me, I was about to watch this man's whole world come crashing down. At 68 years old, I thought I'd seen everything, but nothing could have prepared me for what my husband of 7 years had done to me. See, Vernon thought he was real slick. Thought he'd pulled off the perfect crime while I was sleeping last Tuesday night. I'd been working late on my laptop, finishing up some cybersecurity training materials for the bank where I've been a senior fraud analyst for the past 20 years. When I finally dozed off on the couch, Vernon must have thought Christmas came early. The fool crept over to my laptop, opened it up real quiet-like, and started going through my digital wallet. I know this because my security cameras caught everything. He even had the nerve to pull out his phone and take pictures of what he thought was my personal credit card information. Then he closed that laptop, kissed my forehead like he was some kind of loving husband, and went to bed with a smile on his face. What Vernon didn't know was that the card information he'd stolen wasn't connected to my personal account. It was a dummy card I'd been using for fraud detection training at work. Every single transaction on that card gets flagged immediately and sent straight to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. Vernon and I met at my church, Mount Olive Baptist, about 8 years ago. I'd been divorced for 15 years after my first husband ran off with some young thing from his job. I'd raised my 2 children, Jasmine and Terrence, mostly on my own, put them both through college, and finally felt ready to maybe let someone new into my life. Vernon seemed perfect at first. He was a retired construction foreman, had his own house, seemed financially stable. He knew how to talk to a woman, made me feel special again. My pastor, Reverend Williams, even said he seemed like good people. My best friend Gladys from the church auxiliary warned me to take it slow, but I thought I'd found my second chance at love. We got married in a small ceremony at the church. Nothing fancy, just family and close friends. I moved into his place since it was bigger, and for the first few years, things were good. We traveled together, went to church together, had Sunday dinners with my children and grandchildren. But then things started changing about 2 years ago. Vernon became secretive about his phone, started staying out late claiming he was helping his nephew with construction jobs. Money started getting tight, and he kept asking to borrow from my accounts for emergencies. I'm not stupid. I worked in cybersecurity for 2 decades. I know the signs of someone living beyond their means. The final straw came 3 weeks ago when I found out Vernon had been lying about those construction jobs. His nephew Damon came by looking for him, confused because Vernon had told me he was working with Damon, but Damon hadn't seen his uncle in months. That's when I started paying closer attention. I noticed Vernon watching me type in passwords, asking casual questions about my work accounts, even suggesting we should combine our finances to make things easier. My training kicked in, and I started documenting everything. Last Tuesday night, when I set up my laptop with that dummy credit card information displayed, it wasn't an accident. I suspected Vernon was up to something, and I wanted to catch him red-handed. Boy, did I catch him. Over the next week, while Vernon told me he was going to visit his sister in Atlanta, the alerts from that dummy card lit up my work computer like a Christmas tree. First-class flight to Paris. 5-star hotel suite. Designer clothes from boutiques I couldn't even pronounce. Expensive watches. Fancy restaurants. This man spent $47,000 in 5 days, thinking he was using my money. Each transaction triggered automatic alerts to the Federal Financial Crimes Unit. By day 3 of his vacation, I had FBI agent Rodriguez calling my work phone, asking if I was aware of unusual activity on one of our training accounts. When I explained what was happening, Agent Rodriguez couldn't believe it. "Ma'am, your husband just handed us the easiest fraud case we've seen all year. Every transaction is documented, photographed, and tracked." I spent the rest of that week working with Agent Rodriguez and my lawyer Gloria Patterson from my church, documenting everything. We had photos of Vernon using the card, video surveillance from the hotels and shops, even social media posts from his mistress, because of course there was a mistress. Some young thing named Celeste who was posting pictures of their European adventure all over Instagram with hashtags like #SugarDaddy and #LivingMyBestLife. The woman was even wearing jewelry I recognized from the transaction alerts. While Vernon was living it up in Paris, thinking he'd outsmarted his cybersecurity expert wife, I was calmly preparing for his return. I gathered all the evidence, signed the necessary paperwork with the federal prosecutor, and filed for divorce. This morning, I watched through my kitchen window as Vernon pulled into our driveway in a cab, probably because he'd blown so much money he couldn't afford airport parking. He stepped out wearing a designer suit I'd never seen before, carrying shopping bags from high-end European boutiques. The man actually had the nerve to whistle as he walked up to our front door. I opened it before he could get his key out, and Lord, the smile on his face was something to see. He was practically glowing with pride at what he thought he'd accomplished. "Baby," he said, spreading his arms wide. "Did you miss me? Wait until you see what I brought you back from Paris." He leaned in to kiss me, and I could smell expensive cologne, probably worth more than some people's monthly rent. "Vernon," I said, stepping back, "we need to talk." "Oh, come on now. Don't be like that. I know I should have told you I was going, but I wanted to surprise you. Look at this suit." He spun around like he was on a runway. "And these shoes. Italian leather, baby. Your husband's moving up in the world." He pushed past me into the living room, setting his bags down on my coffee table like he owned the place. "Vernon?" I said again, but he wasn't listening. "Oh, and Inez, I got to thank you for that credit card. I don't know how you managed to get such a high limit, but shoot, that thing worked like a dream over there. Didn't get declined once." My blood pressure shot up, but I kept my voice calm. "What credit card, Vernon?" He winked at me. "Don't play dumb, baby. I know you saw me using your laptop the other night. I thought you might be mad, but clearly you wanted me to have a good time, right? Otherwise, why would you have left all that information just sitting there?" The audacity of this man was breathtaking. "Vernon, sit down." "In a minute, baby. Let me show you this watch first. Cost more than my truck. But ain't it beautiful?" He rolled up his sleeve to show me a gold Rolex that probably cost $15,000. That's when I heard the cars pulling up outside. Before we continue, please tell us where you're watching from so we know how far our stories reach, and subscribe to the channel to help us grow. Vernon was still admiring his stolen watch when the doorbell rang. Not a normal doorbell ring. This was the kind of official, persistent ringing that meant business. "Expecting company?" Vernon asked, finally looking up. "Not exactly," I said, walking toward the front door. Through the peephole, I could see Agent Rodriguez and 3 other federal agents in dark suits. 2 police cars were parked behind their black SUV. Vernon appeared behind me, and I felt him tense up when he saw the vehicles through the window. "Inez, who are these people? Why are there police cars in our driveway?" I turned around to look at my husband, really look at him. This man who'd shared my bed for 7 years, who'd sat in church with me every Sunday, who'd played with my grandchildren and called them his own. This man who'd waited for me to fall asleep so he could steal from me and then had the nerve to come home bragging about it. Those people, Vernon, are federal agents. They're here for you. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint right there in our foyer. "What are you talking about? Federal agents? Inez, what's going on?" The doorbell rang again, followed by a firm knock. "FBI, open up!" Vernon grabbed my arm. "Inez, I don't understand. Why would the FBI be here? What did you do?" I pulled my arm free and smoothed down my house dress. After 40 years of working, 20 of those in cybersecurity, I knew how to handle a crisis. The question, Vernon, isn't what I did. The question is what you thought you were doing when you stole my credit card information and spent $47,000 in Paris. His face went from pale to gray. "Inez, baby, listen to me. I can explain." "Oh, you'll get your chance to explain. To them." I gestured toward the door. "See? The credit card you stole? It wasn't my personal card, Vernon. It was a federal fraud detection training card that I use for work. Every single transaction you made automatically triggered alerts to the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. Vernon's legs gave out and he sank into the chair by our front door. No, no, no. Inez, you're lying. That can't be right. The card worked. I bought all this stuff. Oh, the card worked just fine. That was the point. We needed it to work so we could track how financial criminals operate. Congratulations, Vernon. You just became the star of our next training video. The knocking got more insistent. Ma'am, this is Agent Rodriguez. We need you to open the door. I walked over and undid all 3 locks. Agent Rodriguez stood there with an official-looking folder, flanked by 3 other agents. Good morning, Mrs. Morrison. Is Vernon Morrison present? He's right there, I said, stepping aside. Vernon tried to stand up, but his legs were shaking so badly he had to grab the chair for support. Vernon Morrison, you're under arrest for federal fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized use of federal financial instruments, Agent Rodriguez announced, pulling out handcuffs. Wait! Vernon held up his hands. This is a misunderstanding. Inez is my wife. I thought I was using her card. We're married. That's not stealing. Agent Rodriguez looked at me, then back at Vernon. Sir, did your wife give you permission to access her computer and take photos of financial information? Well, no, but... Did she give you permission to spend $47,000 on luxury items and travel? No, but we're married. What's hers is mine. Actually, I interrupted, that's not how it works. We kept our finances separate, Vernon. You never had permission to touch my accounts, and you definitely didn't have permission to steal federal training materials. One of the other agents spoke up. Sir, we also need to inform you that the woman you traveled with, Celeste Washington, has already been arrested in Los Angeles. She's cooperating fully with our investigation. Vernon's face crumpled. Celeste got arrested? But she said she loved me. She said we were going to start a new life together. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. This grown man, 65 years old, actually believed some 28-year-old woman loved him for his personality. She loved your stolen money, Vernon. The minute the federal agents showed up at her door, she told them everything. About how you bragged about outsmarting your cybersecurity expert wife. About how you promised to leave me and set her up in a nice apartment. About how you gave her a $15,000 necklace that you bought with federal training funds. Agent Rodriguez stepped forward with the handcuffs. Mr. Morrison, you have the right to remain silent. As they read Vernon his rights, I watched 7 years of my life getting handcuffed and led away. But you know what? I didn't feel sad. I felt relieved. Mrs. Morrison, Agent Rodriguez said after they'd put Vernon in the back of their car. We'll need you to come down to the office this week to complete some paperwork, but I want you to know, your husband just handed us the most documented fraud case we've seen in years. The prosecution is going to be very straightforward. What's he looking at? I asked. With the amount he stole and the federal charges? Probably 5 to 7 years if he goes to trial. His lawyer will likely advise him to take a plea deal. I nodded. And my things? My house? Nothing will happen to your assets, ma'am. This was entirely his crime. In fact, since he used federal training materials, there might be additional restitution available to you. After the agents left, I stood in my living room looking at Vernon's shopping bags still sitting on my coffee table. Designer clothes, expensive accessories, all bought with money he'd stolen from what he thought was my account. I picked up my phone and called my daughter Jasmine. Mama, is everything okay? You sound different. Baby girl, your stepfather just got arrested by the FBI. Silence on the other end of the line. Mama, what happened? I told her the whole story, from Vernon's suspicious behavior to his week in Paris, to the federal agents in my driveway. When I finished, Jasmine was quiet for a long moment. Mama, are you okay? Like, emotionally? You know what, baby? I think I'm better than okay. I think I'm free. The next few hours were a whirlwind. Jasmine and Terrence both came over with their families. My grandchildren were confused about why Grandpa Vernon wasn't there anymore, but my adult children understood immediately. "Mama, we never liked him anyway," Terrence admitted while we were cleaning up Vernon's belongings. "Something about him always felt off." "Why didn't you say anything?" "You seemed happy," Jasmine said. "And after Daddy left, we just wanted you to have somebody." By evening, word had spread through our church community. Pastor Williams called to check on me, and Gladys came over with a casserole and a bottle of wine. "I told you something wasn't right about that man," Gladys said, settling into my kitchen chair. "Remember when I said he watched you too closely when you paid for things? You did warn me. I should have listened." "Honey, you followed your heart. That's not wrong. What's wrong is a man who would violate his wife's trust like that." That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, processing everything that had happened. My phone rang around 9 o'clock. It was a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, I heard Vernon's voice. "Inez, baby, thank God you answered. Listen, this is all a big misunderstanding. I need you to call a lawyer and get me out of here. They're trying to say I stole from the government." "Vernon, you did steal from the government." "But I thought it was your card. I thought it was your money." "That doesn't matter. You stole my information without permission. You committed federal fraud, and you cheated on me with a woman young enough to be your granddaughter. Celeste doesn't mean anything to me. She was just fun, Inez. You and me, we're the real thing." I took a deep breath. "Vernon, I filed for divorce this morning. Whatever we had is over. You can't do this to me. I'm your husband, for better or worse, remember?" "This definitely counts as worse, Vernon, and I can do this. I am doing this. If you don't help me, I'm going to lose everything. My house, my truck, my reputation. You should have thought about that before you decided to steal from me." I hung up the phone and immediately blocked his number. The next morning I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, with nobody to answer to but myself. For the first time in 7 years, I made my coffee exactly how I liked it without worrying about Vernon's preferences. My lawyer, Gloria, called around 10. "Inez, I've got some updates for you. Vernon's been charged with multiple federal crimes. His public defender is already talking about a plea deal." "What kind of deal?" "Probably 3 to 5 years in federal prison, full restitution of the money he spent, and his assets will be frozen until he can pay back what he stole." "And the divorce?" "Should be straightforward now. He'll likely agree to anything to avoid additional charges." After I hung up with Gloria, I realized I had a choice to make. I could spend my time being angry and bitter about what Vernon had done to me, or I could focus on what came next. I chose what came next. But first, I had to deal with the aftermath of Vernon's arrest, which was spreading through our community faster than gossip at a church picnic, and I was about to discover that Vernon's betrayal was just the beginning of the surprises waiting for me. The phone started ringing at 6 in the morning. I'd been awake anyway, sipping my coffee and watching the sunrise through my kitchen window, but I wasn't expecting calls this early. "Inez, this is Doris from the church. Girl, is it true? Did Vernon really get arrested by the FBI?" Before I could answer, call waiting beeped. Then again. By 7 a.m., I'd talked to half the congregation, 3 neighbors, and even my old supervisor from the bank who'd seen Vernon's mugshot on the local news website. "Cybersecurity expert's husband arrested in federal fraud scheme," the headline read. They'd somehow gotten hold of Vernon's booking photo, and he looked exactly like what he was, a foolish old man who'd gotten caught red-handed. My doorbell rang around 8. I peeked through the window and saw Vernon's sister Denise standing on my porch, arms crossed, looking like she was ready for war. I opened the door but kept the screen door locked. "Denise?" "Inez, what did you do to my brother?" "Good morning to you too. I didn't do anything to your brother. He did it to himself." "Don't give me that! Vernon told me you set him up. He said you left that credit card information out on purpose." I studied Vernon's sister through the screen. Denise had never liked me. Always thought Vernon had married beneath himself when he chose a woman who'd been divorced. She'd made little comments over the years about my situation and how Vernon was such a good man to take me on. Denise, your brother stole federal financial information and spent $47,000 on luxury items and another woman. If that's my fault, I'd love to hear how. He said it was a misunderstanding. He said you two share everything. We've never shared bank accounts, credit cards, or financial information. Vernon knew that. He chose to steal from me anyway. Denise's face got red. You need to drop these charges right now. Vernon's got grandchildren who look up to him. The charges are federal, Denise. I can't drop them even if I wanted to. And those grandchildren aren't his blood. They're mine. He never legally adopted them. You're destroying a good man over money. I unlocked the screen door and stepped outside. At 68, I wasn't about to be intimidated by anyone, especially not someone defending a thief. Denise, let me make something very clear. Your good man brother waited until he thought I was asleep, snuck onto my work computer, photographed my financial information with his phone, and then spent a week in Paris with his mistress using what he thought was my money. He committed federal crimes, multiple federal crimes. That's not my fault, and it's not my problem. But he's family. No, he was family. Now he's my soon-to-be ex-husband who's facing federal prison time. Denise stared at me for a long moment, then shook her head. You always thought you were better than us, didn't you? With your fancy job and your college degree? Well, look where your pride got you, alone and bitter. Actually, I said, smiling for the first time all morning, it got me free. After Denise left, I called my daughter Jasmine. Mama, I saw the news. How are you holding up? Better than I expected, baby. But I think I need to get out of town for a few days. This phone hasn't stopped ringing. Come stay with us. Marcus would love to see his grandmother, and it'll be good for you to be around family. I was packing a bag when Gloria called with an update. Inez, we need to talk. I just got off the phone with the federal prosecutor, and there's more to Vernon's story than we initially thought. What do you mean? Can you meet me at my office this afternoon? There are some things you need to see. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Gloria's law office staring at a stack of papers that made my head spin. Inez, the federal investigation into Vernon has uncovered some additional issues. It turns out the Paris trip wasn't his first time committing fraud. What are you talking about? Gloria pulled out a thick file. The FBI ran a complete financial background check on Vernon as part of their case. They found evidence that he's been running credit card scams for at least 3 years. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. 3 years? But we've been married for 7. He started small, fake social security numbers to open store credit cards, using other people's information to get loans. The FBI thinks he's stolen over $200,000 total. $200,000? How is that possible? He targeted elderly people mostly, got their information from various sources, used it to open accounts, then made purchases and never paid the bills. Your case just happened to be the one that got him caught because you had federal monitoring on that training card. I sat back in my chair, trying to process this information. Gloria, are you telling me I was married to a career criminal? It looks that way. And Inez, there's more. She pulled out another folder. Vernon's house. The one you moved into when you got married? He never owned it. He's been squatting there for 4 years. The real owner lives in Florida and had no idea anyone was living in his property. My mouth fell open. So Vernon's been... what? Just living in someone else's house this whole time? Apparently. The utilities are in fake names. The address was being used for mail fraud. The FBI is working with the real property owner now. Where does that leave me legally? Well, since you moved in after Vernon started squatting and you had no knowledge of the situation, you're not criminally liable. But you will need to find somewhere else to live. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. So, let me get this straight. The man I married has been a criminal for years. I've been unknowingly living in a stolen house, and now I have to start over completely? I know it's overwhelming, but Inez, there's actually some good news here. I could use some good news. Because Vernon committed federal crimes using your identity and information, you're eligible for victims' compensation. The government has a fund for people who've been defrauded. You'll likely receive a significant settlement. How significant? Based on the damages and the federal nature of the crimes? Probably enough to buy your own place and have money left over for a comfortable retirement. I sat quietly for a moment, letting this all sink in. Gloria, can I ask you something? Of course. How did I not see any of this? I worked in cybersecurity for 20 years. How did I miss that my own husband was a criminal? Gloria leaned forward. Inez, you weren't looking for criminal behavior in your husband. You were looking for love and companionship. Vernon was skilled at what he did. He fooled a lot of people, not just you. But I should have known. Should have known what? That the man who went to church with you every Sunday and played with your grandchildren was running financial scams? That the house you lived in together was stolen property? You're a victim here, not an accomplice. That evening, I was staying at Jasmine's house, helping my grandson Marcus with his homework, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Mrs. Morrison? This is Detective Rivera with the Metro Police Department. I'm calling about your husband, Vernon Morrison. What about him? I thought the FBI was handling his case. They are, ma'am. But we've had several people contact us about your husband in relation to other potential crimes. We'd like to set up a meeting with you to go over some information. What kind of other crimes? We've had 3 elderly women come forward claiming that Vernon Morrison scammed them out of money over the past 2 years. They saw his arrest on the news and contacted us. I closed my eyes. How much money? Combined? About $50,000. These women all met Vernon at various churches around the city. He apparently told them he was a widower looking for companionship, gained their trust, and then convinced them to loan him money for fake emergencies. My heart broke for those women. Detective, I had no idea. We know that, ma'am, but we're hoping you might have information that could help us build cases for these other victims. Would you be willing to come in tomorrow? Of course. After I hung up, Jasmine looked at me with concern. Mama, what was that about? I told her about the detective's call and the other women Vernon had apparently scammed. Mama, this man was running a whole operation. You weren't his wife. You were just his latest mark. But why would he marry me? Why not just take my money and disappear like he did with the others? Because you were different. You had a steady income, a good reputation, and you worked in a field that gave him access to financial information. He probably thought marrying you was like hitting the jackpot. I felt a mix of anger and sadness wash over me. So everything we had was fake. No, Mama. What you felt was real. What you gave to that relationship was real. He's the one who was fake. The next morning, I met with Detective Rivera and gave him everything I could remember about Vernon's behavior, his habits, and any information that might help the other victims get justice. As I was leaving the police station, Detective Rivera stopped me. Mrs. Morrison, I want you to know something. In my 15 years on this job, I've seen a lot of fraud victims. Most of them blame themselves, think they should have seen the signs. But you handled this exactly right. You caught him, documented everything, and now he's going to face justice not just for what he did to you, but for what he did to those other women. It doesn't feel like I handled it right. It feels like I was completely foolish. Ma'am, being trusting isn't foolish. Taking advantage of trust is criminal. Vernon Morrison is the criminal here, not you. That afternoon, I was back at Gloria's office signing papers to officially start the divorce proceedings. when her secretary knocked on the door. "Ms. Patterson, there's a young woman here to see Mrs. Morrison. She says it's about Vernon Morrison." Gloria and I exchanged glances. "Send her in." The woman who walked through the door was probably in her early 30s, well-dressed, with the kind of nervous energy that comes from having something important to say. "Mrs. Morrison? My name is Cassandra Wright. I think I need to tell you something about your husband." "Please, sit down. What is it?" Cassandra perched on the edge of the chair, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "I saw Vernon's arrest on the news, and Mrs. Morrison, I think I'm your husband's wife, too." The room went completely silent. "What did you say?" "I married Vernon Morrison 3 years ago in Las Vegas. We've been living together in an apartment across town. I had no idea he was married to someone else until I saw the news story and it mentioned his wife, Inez." I felt the world tilt sideways. "You're telling me Vernon committed bigamy?" Cassandra nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I think so. And Mrs. Morrison, if what they're saying on the news is true about him stealing money, then I think he's been stealing from me too." Gloria pulled out a legal pad and started taking notes. "Cassandra, can you tell us exactly when and where you married Vernon?" As Cassandra told her story, the full scope of Vernon's deception became clear. He'd convinced her that he was a successful contractor, had rented an apartment in her name but paid the rent himself, and had been systematically draining her savings account for business investments that never existed. "Mrs. Morrison," Cassandra said, turning to me, "I am so sorry. If I had known about you—" "Honey, this isn't your fault any more than it's mine. Vernon's the one who lied to both of us." "So what happens now?" Cassandra asked. Gloria looked up from her notes. "Now we call the FBI back, because Vernon Morrison just added bigamy and additional fraud charges to his growing list of federal crimes." As we waited for Agent Rodriguez to arrive, I looked at Cassandra, this woman who had unknowingly been sharing my husband for 3 years, and realized something profound. Vernon hadn't just betrayed me. He'd betrayed everyone who'd ever trusted him. But his biggest mistake was underestimating exactly how many people were going to fight back. Agent Rodriguez walked into Gloria's office an hour later, took one look at the two of us sitting there and shook his head. "Let me guess. There's more to the Vernon Morrison story?" "Agent Rodriguez," I said, "meet wife number 2. But even as we prepared to add bigamy to Vernon's charges, I had no idea that we were about to uncover the biggest surprise of all, one that would change everything I thought I knew about the man I'd shared 7 years of my life with. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in a federal courtroom watching my husband of 7 years stand before a judge in an orange jumpsuit, about to learn his fate. But Vernon was no longer just facing charges for stealing from me and committing bigamy with Cassandra. Agent Rodriguez's investigation had uncovered something none of us had expected. Vernon Morrison was running the largest marriage fraud scheme the FBI had seen in the Southeast region in over a decade. It turned out Cassandra and I weren't wife number 1 and 2. We were wife number 7 and 8. "Your Honor," the federal prosecutor announced, "the defendant has been operating a systematic marriage and financial fraud scheme for over 8 years. He has defrauded a total of 11 women, 8 of whom he legally married in different states, stealing an estimated $400,000 in cash and credit." I sat in the gallery between Cassandra and another one of Vernon's wives, a woman named Dorothy Jenkins, who'd come forward after seeing the news coverage. Dorothy was 72 years old, had been married to Vernon for 2 years, and thought she was his only wife while he systematically drained her late husband's life insurance money. "Mrs. Morrison," Agent Rodriguez had explained to me the week before, "your husband was essentially running a criminal enterprise. He would meet women at churches, dating websites, or community events, charm them into marriage, gain access to their finances, and then disappear when the money ran out or when he got caught. But he didn't disappear from me or Cassandra. That's because you two were different. You had steady incomes and good credit that he could exploit long-term. He was essentially farming you while he hunted for quick scores with the other women. The scope of Vernon's operation was staggering. He had fake Social Security cards, driver's licenses from multiple states, and had been using different variations of his name to avoid detection. Vernon Morrison, Vernon Maurice, Vernon M. Richardson. He had documentation for all of them. In court, the judge was going through the charges one by one. Mr. Morrison, you have pleaded guilty to 8 counts of bigamy, 12 counts of federal fraud, 4 counts of identity theft, 2 counts of money laundering, and 1 count of operating a continuing criminal enterprise. Is that correct? Vernon, looking nothing like the confident man who'd walked into our house 3 weeks ago bragging about his European vacation, could barely speak. Yes, Your Honor. The court has reviewed your plea agreement. You will serve 12 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 8 years. You will pay full restitution to all victims, totaling $647,000 including interest and penalties. All of your assets will be liquidated to begin restitution payments. 12 years. Vernon was 65 years old. When he got out of prison, he'd be 77. Additionally, Mr. Morrison, you are permanently banned from using any dating websites, apps, or services. You are prohibited from entering any religious institutions except for your own worship. You are required to register with local authorities as a financial predator upon your release. As the judge continued with the sentencing, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, but sadness. Not for Vernon. He'd made his choices and earned every consequence. I felt sad for the years I'd lost, for the trust that had been broken, for the other women who'd been hurt by his schemes. But mostly, I felt free. After the hearing, Agent Rodriguez walked with me to my car. Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to let you know that your victim's compensation has been approved. You should receive the full amount within 30 days. How much are we talking about? $250,000 plus your legal fees covered by the Federal Victims Fund. I stopped walking. I'm sorry, what? The government takes financial crimes very seriously, especially when they involve systematic fraud like Vernon's operation. You'll also receive priority in the restitution payments as his assets are liquidated. $250,000. After working my entire adult life, never quite having enough saved for the retirement I'd dreamed of, Vernon's crime was about to give me complete financial freedom. Agent Rodriguez, can I ask you something? Of course. How many women like me have you seen? Women who got fooled like this? He paused, considering his answer. Mrs. Morrison, in my experience, the women Vernon targeted weren't foolish. They were successful, intelligent, and trusting. Vernon was a professional criminal who spent years perfecting his methods. You didn't get fooled. You got victimized by an expert. I appreciate that. But I also want you to know something else. Most victims in cases like this never recover emotionally or financially. You're going to be just fine. 2 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of my new house, a beautiful 3-bedroom ranch I'd purchased with cash from my victim's compensation, when my phone rang. Inez, this is Gladys. Girl, you need to turn on Channel 7. I grabbed the remote and flipped to the local news. There on the screen was a reporter standing outside the federal courthouse. The completion of one of the largest marriage fraud cases in regional history. Vernon Morrison, who operated under multiple identities to marry and defraud 11 women, will serve 12 years in federal prison. But this case has had an unusual outcome for one of his victims. The screen cut to an interview with me from the previous week. I'd agreed to talk to the media because Agent Rodriguez said it might help other fraud victims come forward. I want other women to know that if something feels wrong, trust that instinct, my voice said from the television. And if you've been victimized by someone like Vernon, it's not your fault. You don't have to be ashamed. The reporter came back on screen. Inez Morrison, who worked in cybersecurity for 2 decades, is now using her experience to help other fraud victims. She's partnering with federal authorities to create educational programs for potential targets of romance scams. That was true. After everything that had happened, I decided to turn my experience into something positive. The FBI had asked me to help develop training materials for recognizing and preventing romance fraud, and I'd agreed to speak at churches and community centers about financial safety. But the best part of my new life wasn't the work or the money or even the justice. It was the peace. I woke up every morning in my own house, made my coffee exactly how I liked it, and didn't have to worry about anyone else's agenda. I'd redecorated everything to my taste. Lots of plants, bright colors, photos of my children and grandchildren everywhere. My daughter Jasmine had been worried about me living alone, but I loved it. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't responsible for anyone else's emotions, finances, or problems. Last month, Pastor Williams had tried to introduce me to a nice widower from his previous church. Sister Inez, Brother Charles is a good man, lost his wife 2 years ago, has his own home, very active in the church. Pastor Williams, I'd interrupted gently, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not interested in dating right now. But sister, don't you get lonely? I'd thought about that question for a long time. You know what, Pastor? I was lonelier in my marriage to Vernon than I've ever been living alone. And that was the truth. Being with Vernon, especially toward the end, had been like living with a stranger who was slowly stealing pieces of my life. Now, every day belonged entirely to me. I'd taken up painting, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. I'd joined a book club at the library. I'd started taking my grandchildren on special trips, just me and them, creating memories that belonged to us. 3 months after Vernon's sentencing, I received a letter forwarded through Gloria's office. It was from Celeste, Vernon's mistress from the Paris trip. Mrs. Morrison, the letter read, I know you have no reason to listen to anything I have to say, but I wanted you to know how sorry I am. I didn't know Vernon was married when I met him. He told me he was divorced and that his ex-wife was trying to ruin him financially. I believed him because he seemed so genuine. By the time I realized what kind of person he really was, I was already in too deep. I lost my job, my apartment, and my savings because of Vernon's lies. I just wanted you to know that I never meant to hurt you, and I think you're incredibly brave for how you handled everything. I hope you're able to move on and find happiness. I read the letter twice, then put it in my desk drawer. I'd learned not to carry other people's guilt or pain. Celeste was young and had made poor choices, but Vernon was the criminal. She was a victim too, in her own way. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Cassandra. Inez, did you see the news story about Vernon trying to file an appeal? No. What happened? His lawyer tried to argue that the sentences were too harsh because Vernon was struggling with gambling addiction and that explained his behavior. And? The judge threw it out immediately. Apparently, they found no evidence of any gambling problem, and even if there had been, it wouldn't excuse systematic fraud and bigamy. Cassandra and I had become unlikely friends through this whole ordeal. She was working on rebuilding her credit and her life, and we checked in with each other regularly. How are you doing? I asked her. Better. I moved back in with my sister for now, but I'm saving up for my own place. And Inez? I started seeing a counselor to help me understand how I missed all the red flags. That's good, honey. Healing takes time. What about you? Any regrets? I looked around my sunny kitchen, at the plants thriving on my windowsill, at the photo of me and my grandchildren from our trip to the zoo last weekend. You know what, Cassandra? I don't think I have any regrets, even about marrying Vernon. Really? Why? Because it taught me what I don't want in my life, and it showed me how strong I am when I need to be. After we hung up, I walked out to my back porch with my coffee. I'd had a small garden planted, and everything was starting to bloom. The tomatoes were coming in beautifully, and I had more flowers than I knew what to do with. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, waved from her yard. "Good morning, Inez. How are the tomatoes looking?" "Ready for harvest. Come grab some later if you want." This was my life now. Neighbors who knew my real name and my real story. A community that had embraced me not as Vernon's wife, but as myself. Last week, I'd received a call from a television producer who wanted to make a documentary about Vernon's fraud scheme. "Mrs. Morrison, your story is remarkable. The way you caught him using your own cybersecurity expertise, the fact that you helped bring down an entire criminal operation, viewers would find it inspiring." I'd politely declined. My story isn't about Vernon or what he did. It's about what came after. Because that was the truth. Vernon's betrayal was just the beginning of my real story. The real story was about a woman who discovered that she didn't need anyone else's validation or companionship to be whole. The real story was about building a life that belonged entirely to her. 6 months after Vernon's sentencing, I was at my grandson Marcus's baseball game, cheering from the stands with Jasmine and Terrence, when my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Dorothy Jenkins, another one of Vernon's wives. "Inez, wanted to let you know, I just closed on my new condo, used the victim's compensation to buy it outright. No more worrying about rent or mortgages. Thank you for being so strong during all this. You showed the rest of us how to fight back." I smiled and put my phone away. All of Vernon's victims were rebuilding their lives, and most of us were doing better than we'd been before we met him. Vernon had thought he was so clever, targeting women he saw as vulnerable or lonely. But he'd underestimated every single one of us. We weren't victims anymore. We were survivors, and we were thriving. As Marcus hit a double and rounded the bases, I stood up and cheered louder than anyone else in those stands. This was my family, my life, my choice. Vernon Morrison was locked in a federal prison, spending his days in a concrete cell, wearing the same orange jumpsuit every day, eating institutional food, and following someone else's schedule for the next 12 years. I was sitting in the sunshine at my grandson's baseball game, planning a weekend trip to visit my sister in Atlanta, and deciding whether to plant roses or lavender in my front yard. The difference between his life and mine was the difference between someone who'd tried to steal happiness and someone who'd built it honestly, one day at a time. When people asked me now if I was lonely or if I missed being married, I always gave them the same answer. I spent 7 years living with someone who turned out to be a stranger. Now I'm living with someone I know completely, myself. And I really like her company. That night, as I sat on my back porch watching the fireflies dance around my garden, I realized something profound. Vernon's betrayal hadn't destroyed my life. It had given me the chance to build a better one. At 68 years old, I was finally free to be exactly who I wanted to be. And that woman was stronger, wiser, and happier than I'd ever imagined possible. The last I heard, Vernon was working in the prison laundry, making 17 cents an hour, trying to pay back the $647,000 he owed his victims. At that rate, he'd be well over 100 years old before he finished paying us back. But I wasn't waiting around for Vernon's money. I was too busy living my own life, on my own terms, surrounded by people who loved me for exactly who I was. And that, I realized, was the best revenge of all. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.